So, I've spent the past month playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Over 150 hours played, every single quest complete, and after all that, let me just get to the point, and with no spoilers, tell you whether this game lives up to the hype. There's quite a bit to get to, and I want to do it fast, so...
Should we get to work?
Now, I'm going to keep the story talk to a minimum because I want to spoil nothing, but there is one story thing you need to know. The first Kingdom Come Deliverance, a game I have spent hundreds of hours with, it's my third favorite game of all time, is a simple little prequel compared to KCD2. This game takes Henry away from the remote backwater villages the first game had, and instead puts you at the very center of the civil war that was taking place in Bohemia circa 1403. There is a reason Warhorse chose the year they did. Bohemia at the time was being ruled by an invading king, Sigismund, the very same king who ordered the attack on Henry's hometown where he lost everything at the start of Game 1. And because Henry, of course, doesn't support Sigismund, and because much of KCD2 takes place in Kuttenberg, a major city where opinions on who should rule are split, well, I don't want to spoil anything, so what I will say is that if a very intelligent, revenge-fueled story filled with duels, castle sieges, and medieval espionage sounds good to you, then KCD2 is a home run. I loved this game story, loved it, and most importantly, it felt like it was written by people who were really passionate about the story they were telling. I hate to say this, actually, you know what, I don't really hate to say this at all. In my opinion, a lot of games lately feel very hollow, like they're written by people who don't have much to say. KCD2, though, could never be accused of that. This game has a ton of heart, more memorable characters than I can possibly count, and whatever direction you're expecting the story to go, well, you'd probably be wrong. I know I was.
Right. I'm off to find myself a big old cabbage for my cleavage.
One other story thing, because I probably should answer this, but if you've played the first game, although you don't really need to have played the first because this game is for the most part telling its own story, but if you have and you're wondering how KCD2 will factor in your choices from the first, well, specific events rarely come up, but when they do, if there was a choice involved, you generally have the option to tell the game what you did. So for an obvious example, and this one comes up a bunch of times from the very start of the game, but if someone asks Henry if he has a girl back home, you can say no, or you can mention Teresa.
Yeah. And I hope she'll wait. Her name's Teresa. Her uncle owns a mill on the river in Rattay.
Old choices aren't handled like, say, The Witcher 3, where you input your choice once and the game sticks with it from there. Instead, it's handled per conversation when things occasionally come up, if you want to mention them. Let's get to the gameplay talk though, specifically the combat first, because that's probably what you want to hear most. Now, I've already done 2 preview videos on KCD2, one from playing the first few hours back in August, and another last month after playing through the first third of the game, and if you saw either of those, especially the more recent one, you'll know that I love what Warhorse have done with the combat, although, to be completely honest here, I feel like across YouTube, this is a dead horse subject at this point. I mean, if you have been watching any KCD2 preview content over the past 5 months or so, you've probably heard many times at this point that the combat system has really been cleaned up from the first game. You've likely heard words like smooth and refined so many times that you want to projectile vomit every time you hear them. That doesn't make those words any less true though, and to put it simply, the combat in KCD2 is what you get when you take something that already existed, aka KCD1's combat, and you spend 5 years just polishing it. It feels like Warhorse's true vision for medieval combat, no longer weighed down by a limited budget, and with only one big complaint, I loved it, and I'll also say that the few new weapon types they've added fit right in. The crossbows are deadly, the polearms give you a ton of range in melee combat, and the guns are so impractical, but, well, I'm gonna do a dedicated video on the guns, but they're just so stupidly awesome, and I had a dumb grin on my face every time I fired a shot. Call me easy to please if you want, but packing gunpowder and a lead ball into a barrel before one-shotting a knight in full plate armor, well, I'm a fan. Anyway, I mentioned having one issue with the combat, and it's just that, well...
That was easier than I thought.
Unfortunately, the more I played KCD2, the more strongly I felt that Warhorse went a bit too far in making this game easier than the first. The start is about perfect. Henry at the beginning of KCD2 feels like a guy who sorta knows what he's doing but isn't a master by any means, but I'd say that well-balanced feeling only sticks around for a third of the game, and honestly, I'm stretching it. Even by that point, I was getting pretty overpowered, no fear of dying on my end, and while I won't show this to avoid spoilers, when I say pretty overpowered, I mean a pivotal story duel that's in the trailers lasted less than 3 seconds because I beat the guy in 2 hits, and that was less than half of the way through the game. That easiness really didn't let up much from that point onward. The game only has one difficulty, by the way. Hardcore mode is coming later. And here's the thing. I didn't grind any XP by doing a ton of combat training or by brewing potions for hours, or really anything with the intention of leveling myself up or over-leveling myself. I just did the available side content in the open world, and still, I found myself hitting the level cap with certain combat-related skills when the game was only about half over, around when I was getting to the second map, which really didn't seem right to me. Anyway, since I mentioned the open world, I want to talk about KCD2's exploration for a bit, because this is an unsung part of where Warhorse have really stepped things up. In the first game, when you weren't doing a quest or following a treasure map, the open world didn't really offer much outside of just being immersive and nice to spend time in. Walking in the woods was nice, hunting could be relaxing, but there was very little, almost nothing in the way of meaningful unmarked content to find. KCD2, on the other hand, is a huge step up in pretty much every way. Multiple times I came across unmarked points of interest in the woods that turned into full-blown quest lines. Kuttenberg has peasant conflicts you can overhear and then intervene and try to solve, and there are so many random events to find out on the road when you're traveling. In KCD1, there were like 6 or 7 that just repeated over and over again, whereas in KCD2, I must have come across near 100 different ones, and just like the unmarked points of interest, the random events can sometimes turn into full-blown quests. Even more impressively, and this is the sort of thing I live for in games, a lot of the open-world content you'll find ties back into the main story. In the game's first area especially, because if you didn't know, KCD2 has 2 maps, the region surrounding Trotsky Castle and the region surrounding the city of Kuttenberg, but the first map in particular does an amazing job of having everything matter, have everything connect. I felt so rewarded for having done all the side content, because once I started doing more of the main quest, certain characters I'd already met popped back up in the main story, and the game always acknowledged that I already knew them, and in certain cases, knowing them would help you immensely and give you new options for solving whatever the problem of the quest was. For example, there's a series of side quests where sheep keep wandering off at different farms, and Henry has to go find the sheep in question each time. During the main quest, one of the objectives involved one of the farmers I'd previously helped, and because I'd helped him out 20 hours earlier in a minor side quest, I was able to use that as leverage for getting him to help me, which he did. And by the way, I know those sheep side quests sound like complete filler, but they ended up being some of my favorites in the game.
What do you think about the situation in our country? You're right there. It's full of bandits and humans. Of course. Can't forget about the wolves. I absolutely agree.
The world of KCD2 just feels so real. You hear a random NPC mention where their dog died, go find the grave. Do well in the Kuttenberg tournament, all of a sudden you have fans among roadside bandits who will just let you go because they're fans of Henry. It's amazing and goes so much deeper than most games even begin to attempt. To be honest, the only complaint I really have with KCD2's side content is the lack of any hunting quests. I don't know why KCD1 had a ton of these, but KCD2 has 0. You can still hunt just for fun or to level up your marksmanship skill, but there are no quests where you're tasked with hunting, and while you could argue those quests were filler in Game 1, I liked them quite a bit as something relaxing to do, so they were missed. Maybe in one of the DLCs. I guess another small side content issue, now that I think of it, would be that it's pretty easy to end up overly rich with nothing to spend your money on. By the time I got to the Kuttenberg area, so 70 plus hours of content left, I had more than enough money to immediately buy the very best equipment in the city, and because of that, money from that point forward felt pretty useless. I seriously felt like you could have cut this game's economy in half, like make quest rewards and the value of sold items half of what they were, and I still would have ended up with more than enough money to spend. And I should point out, the excess funds weren't from me robbing merchants' inventory or trying to break the game's economy. Again, I just did the normal side content. In fact, I actually skipped most of the non-quest related treasure maps you can find. Yet I still had tons and tons of money, which definitely goes hand in hand with the difficulty or lack of problem I mentioned before, but it is what it is. It didn't do much of anything in hindering my enjoyment of the game. There were still interesting quest rewards in the Kuttenberg area, crossbows and shields and other gear, but the money itself became meaningless much earlier than I would have preferred, although I assume a couple of DLCs with new things to throw your money at could fix that problem quickly. Anyway, since I mentioned robbing merchants a minute ago, I do have to say stealth and more importantly the new crime system, well, in terms of detail, a new bar has been set with KCD2. Every part of it is a monumental improvement from KCD1. In fact, I have never played a game with so little emphasis on being a criminal that had so much work put into its crime system. The thing is, if you're not regularly getting caught, which quite frankly I basically never did other than when I wanted to test the crime system, but if you're not regularly getting spotted committing crimes, you won't be seeing 99% of what's there, like the new punishments, caning, branding, the pillory, execution. But despite the fact that this is a system most players won't be interacting with much, Warhorse have still gone above and beyond in making it extremely detailed. If you commit a crime, guards now know exactly what crime you committed and comment on it. Every part of your punishment is also related to the crime you committed. If you do something evil, like poison an NPC's food for just one example, you can stick around to watch the results play out in real time, and even revisit their loved ones later to hear them grieve if you're feeling extra sadistic. And what I also thought was really cool is that the new crime system interacts with other parts of the game. For a couple of examples, if you level up your scholarship skill enough, which is done mostly by reading books, you can talk or at least attempt to talk your way out of crimes with special dialogue options where Henry will attempt to wiggle his way out of things like murder by twisting the law in his favor. Or if you level up your drinking perk enough, then while drunk you can excuse yourself from certain crimes by just blaming it on the alcohol.
I have problems with my head.
There is just so much detail that most players will never come into contact with, and that sort of commitment to detail is something embedded in every inch of this game. Now, I want to wrap this video up by talking about performance, and more importantly talking about bugs, because as you probably know, KCD1 had quite the reputation at launch for how buggy it was. But before we get to those subjects, I do need to take a second to thank my favorite by far sponsor for the channel, Factor, who in my opinion are the meal delivery service, the one you should really consider. I've said this many times before because it's true, but since October 2023, over a year and a half ago at this point, I've been ordering from Factor out of my own pocket because their meals have solved every food problem I've ever had. If you're like me and you work a lot, maybe too much, you might understand the struggle of just not having time to cook, or even having a spare second, really. And the unfortunate thing is that most convenient foods are either unhealthy, prohibitively expensive, or just plain boring. But Factor is the rare exception that's none of those things. Their meals are fresh, they're very affordable, and they're beyond easy to prepare. Whenever you're feeling quite hungry, their meals can be heated and ready to eat in just 2 minutes, and your order is fully customizable, from how many meals to what meals you get, with a rotating menu of over 30 options to choose from each and every week. To get started yourself, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50neon to get 50% off your first Factor box and free shipping. If you're on the fence, just know that you won't be locked in for anything if you give them a try. You can cancel or skip weeks at literally any time with no charge, so I'm just personally recommending give that heavily discounted first box a go, and I promise you won't be disappointed. Okay, so let's talk performance, and I think more importantly, bugs. Now, I've been playing the game on PC, as that's the code I've been sent, and I just have to say this is one of the most stable pre-release builds I have ever played. Granted, I was playing on a 4090, so of course you'd expect solid performance, but after 150 hours, 4K, absolutely every setting put to ultra with DLSS in quality mode, I was averaging well over 100 FPS even in Gutenberg, the biggest, densest city in the game. The only stutters I ever had were when the game would autosave, or occasionally when objectives would update, which granted was slightly annoying every now and then. But other than that, this game just felt so stable, and it's important to point out that between the preview video I did and now my review, Warhorse released a patch that improved performance substantially, and even more relevant, the release version of the game should have even stronger performance than what I'm reporting. For me and all other reviewers on PC, KCD2 had Denuvo installed. That was just for, I guess, security reasons when the game was yet to be released, but the launch version that you guys will be playing won't have it. It'll be gone as of February 4th. As for bugs, well, if you happen to watch my preview video, you'll know that I said I had 0 significant bugs during my first 50 hours of the game. I would say that near flawless experience held true for another 20, but once I reached the Gutenberg area around the 70-hour mark, I definitely noticed an increase in the amount of bugs I encountered. Most of them were near harmless, characters clipping through each other, those were usually just funny, weird camera angles, dialogue randomly getting very quiet or occasionally not playing at all, the sort of thing that, well,
I wouldn't worry about it that much.
Those little moments will be smoothed out. They did very little to affect my overall experience, and were fairly rare to begin with. They just stood out in comparison to the nearly bug-free first half of the game. That said, in addition to the little things, I did also have 3 what I would consider significant issues while completing Gutenberg content. One minor side quest completely broke to the point where I had to kill a friendly NPC to brute force it into moving on. Another quest I either can't begin or it just doesn't exist. I'm meant to speak to a person from the mining district who can't be interacted with. The bug there might actually be that he has a quest icon on him but doesn't actually have another quest because I've already completed a couple for that specific NPC. And also the tournament, which is something Warhorse have been showing off a lot in their marketing, well, I've had nothing but trouble with it. Just like in KCD1, there's a weekly repeating quest for a tournament, and I have not been able to get through it a single time out of 7 completions without some sort of major bug. Opponents not showing up, opponents not being able to get over the fence, or even spectators and opponents all stacking on top of each other in the middle of the arena. I had to reload many times with the tournament to work around bugs, and it just needs a lot of polishing. That said, those are 3 issues out of 70 plus hours of content in the Kuttenberg area, and it's worth pointing out that there is a day 1 patch coming that will supposedly be fixing a ton of bugs, so I'm really not too worried. KCD2 in its pre-release review build feels more polished than the first game does today after countless patches. That said, I think this is a good time to wrap this video up by saying this. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is a game I wholeheartedly recommend with everything I have in me. It's a game made by a studio who believe in what they're doing, who had a clear vision of what they wanted to accomplish, and they pulled it off. This has been my most anticipated game since the second I rolled credits on the first, and I can confidently say that KCD2 has exceeded nearly every expectation I had for it, and it's leapfrogged the first into being my second favorite game of all time. If you like good stories, if you like RPGs, if you like medieval anything, then go buy this if you haven't already. If you've watched my channel in the past, the preview and review videos I've done, you know how rare it is to hear this kind of unabashed praise I'm giving. I loved this game, and barring my personal preference for a more difficult experience, I had 0 significant issues with it. Over the coming days, weeks, and months, I'm going to be posting a ton of extra KCD2 content, including a video very soon on a few things you really should know at the start of the game to make your experience a better one. So if interested in more KCD2 videos, please feel free to subscribe, and if you enjoyed this specific video, consider leaving a like, as that really helps my content get out there. I hate asking, but YouTube puts a lot of stock in likes. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, thank you to my patrons for their continued support, keep an eye out over there for a bonus video soon, and, well, that's all for today. See ya.